Trump has now realized that Putin is completely playing him. Putin is, if this was a game of poker, Putin is the master card player and Trump is looking like an amateur. He's now realized that, and being so thick-skinned is now reacting. Well, I think we're in a really interesting week this week when we look at Ukraine. Really, for the first time since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the prospect of some sort of nuclear confrontation has never been closer. We're also this week coming to the end of President Trump's ultimatum to Putin that he needs to come to the peace negotiation table by Friday, which is the 12 days up. Otherwise, Trump is going to put huge sanctions and tariffs on Putin, which potentially will drive his economy, Putin's economy, into the ground. And even the Russians can't make tanks and ammunition without hard currency. So things are pretty finely balanced. And Steve Witkoff, the US envoy to Russia and also the Middle East, didn't seem quite so jolly and bonhomie as he has in the past here. And things are pretty tight-lipped. I think the Russian line coming out is that, interesting discussions and some progress, but in a lot of historically in these sort of negotiations, that's almost a euphemism for nothing has really happened. Now, the Russians still think that they are in the ascendancy in the ground war in Ukraine. They think they're making ground, but this is painfully slow at huge casualties to the Russians. And I think those of us outside Russia can't understand how the Russian public allow, 1 million soldiers killed or injured, 10,000 tanks, etc., etc., etc. So when it looks at who's in the ascendancy, it's difficult to say. And the thing that seems to have got Trump going is the relentless attacks on civilian targets. That seems to be the thing that has suddenly triggered Trump, who, early on after he took power in the States at the beginning of the year, seemed to be working and favoring the Russians. Now that seems to be very much changed. So at the moment, it is difficult to say. And from what we understand, Steve Witkoff will head back to the US and have a chat with President Trump before the Friday deadline. Unfortunately, I think his inconsistency at the beginning set the tone for these negotiations. And Trump so often, not just in to do with Ukraine, but to do with tariffs and sanctions generally, seems to have changed. If Twitter and X doesn't like what he says, he seems to change his mind, which that might be all well when you're doing real estate deals, but when blood and guts and war in place, inconsistency is hugely dangerous. And you really, when negotiating between warring factions, you've got to be pretty clear on what you mean, because any misunderstanding or misjudgment can lead to disaster. And of course, going back to the nuclear piece here, why we're all so concerned is that both sides in this, are bristling with nuclear hardware, and the chance for a mistake, a misunderstanding, or a misjudgment are huge. Putin, I think, still believes that if he can destroy as much of the civilian infrastructure, kill as many Ukrainians as possible, then the rest of the country will vote with its feet. However, I think the Kremlin and Putin are really looking at this through their own, what their own people would do. And it's very different for a democratic country like Ukraine, very different indeed. So the upping of these attacks, I think, actually is going to backfire on Putin, because, in the beginning, Trump seemed to be more interested in doing business deals with Putin than actually stopping the war in Ukraine. Trump told Putin to stop, and he didn't. And I think in the latter, in the last few weeks, perhaps months, Trump has now realized that Putin is completely playing him. Putin is, if this was a game of poker, Putin is the master card player and Trump is looking like an amateur. He's now realized that, and being so thick-skinned, is now reacting. And we're going to have to wait and see, I expect, tomorrow and Friday, exactly how Trump's going to react. But because of his inconsistency in the past, maybe Putin is gambling that he's going to dampen things down. And already we're hearing that Trump is possibly damping down on the 100% secondary tariffs, which would crucify the Russian economy. These are not direct sanctions on Russia per se, because Russia buys, well, Russia is sanctioned, so it can't really buy or sell anything to the Americans. What Trump is aiming at is mainly people who buy oil off the Russians, because that's where they get all their foreign currency. That is what's propping up their economy. And number one is the Chinese. Number two are the Indians, and number three are the Turks. And a lot of his as it were, focus has been on India, because they have been buying all this cheap oil and really defying Trump. Now, Trump doesn't want to hack off the Chinese too much because, of course, his economy relies on a lot of Chinese goods, and China buys a lot of US goods. So again, we talk about how transactional Trump is, but actually India is probably not so important to the Americans. The Indians don't really buy much American military hardware. They're not in the same volume of buying American kit and supplying the American economy as the Chinese are. Certainly analysts, I think today in the UK and the US are saying that if people stop buying Russian oil, Russia will run out of money very quickly and the economy will grind to a halt. There'll be a run on the banks, which Putin can't afford. Putin cannot afford for Russia to go bankrupt, because that is the end of him. That is the end of Russia can't survive. Can't feed its people. Can't operate without hard currency, without dollars and gold, and a lot of that comes from oil. And if that's cut off, so I think everybody is hoping that Putin will believe that Trump is serious in what he's doing and will come to the negotiation table on Friday. I think the reality is probably not there. Putin will probably gamble yet again that Trump will change his mind and will keep going, because Putin still believes that he can achieve his aim, and his aim is the complete subjugation of Ukraine. That aim hasn't changed at all since the 24th of February 2022. And he thinks he can do it. Really, any short of that is a failure. And he knows. And I suppose one of the concerns is that both Trump and Putin are fairly old men. And one hopes that their desire for a great legacy is greater than their desire for instantaneous sort of gratitude by being successful at the moment. So yeah, I think there are so many ways that this can go. And ultimately, I think those of us sitting on the sidelines hope that it'll go away of a just peace for Ukraine, because anything else could be a pretty disastrous next couple of months and years for Europe and perhaps the wider world.